We spend a lot of time at our computers, but if you're like me, you'd like to spend less time at your computer. So I'm going to talk to you about getting the best computer hardware, spending the least amount of money, but getting the most bang for your buck, getting good performance so that the computer will be as fast as possible. I'm Tony Northrup, a professional photographer and photography educator, but in my past life, I was an IT nerd. I wrote more than 30 books about computers, including books like Windows 8 Inside Out. And I had a specialty in performance optimization. I was also a software developer and wrote a bunch of books about software development. So I have a very detailed understanding of how computers perform. I only mention that not to toot my own horn, but because whenever I talk about computer hardware, I always get people telling me like, stick to photography. Like, why do you think you know about this stuff? It's like, this was actually my profession for a long, long time. First, I want to bring up tablets and smartphones because 5 years ago, it was standard that every photographer would sit down at a computer with their memory card reader and do everything in Lightroom. That's no longer the case anymore. A lot of photographers are working directly on their tablets and smartphones, and that can be okay. But as of December 2018, we've tested the latest iPad Pros and it works. But would I want to do it every day as a professional? No. It's okay. When we travel, we'll use an iPad because it's convenient. But at the same time, I still think there's no replacement for having a proper mouse and keyboard and stylus, especially when it comes down to things like storing and managing a lot of files, which you have to do all the time. That right there is where tablets and smartphones really fall apart. When you have thousands and thousands of files for different clients, you need to back them up to offsite storage. You need to move this over here and do this. And the operating systems just aren't there now. So I'm still pushing everybody towards having a proper computer, whether it's a PC, Mac, laptop, desktop, it's all going to benefit you. And unfortunately, I can't be specific in my recommendations about these things. I'm going to talk to you about how to select a computer with the right processor, the right memory, the right GPU, the right hard drive, but I cannot say get the Dell 62 BFG because it's going to change. Like computer parts and stuff literally will change every couple of weeks. They're constantly cycling through different model numbers. It's impossible for me to recommend something. So I'm going to have to be general about it. But when we're done, we're going to go and actually do some online shopping. And I'm going to look at different computers with you to talk about the thought process in picking a computer that's optimized to get the most bang for your buck for photo editing. First of all, let me just say software is improving faster than hardware is. Hardware is not improving particularly fast anymore. Moore's Law has ended. If you have a computer from the last 3 years, 4 years, maybe even 5 years, you won't see a big difference by upgrading to the same level of computer. But the software has really made a big difference. If you are still using like Lightroom 5 or Lightroom 6, that's very slow. Adobe in particular with their Lightroom software has made pretty massive leap in just the last 6 months or so. So I strongly recommend if you are sitting at your computer like, oh, why is photo processing taking so long? Get Adobe Creative Cloud. I know it sucks to have to pay $10 a month for that in Photoshop. That sucks. I'd rather just pay something outright. They don't give you a choice about it. It's still the software that I think is the best. And the latest version is so much faster that it's pretty easy to recoup those $10 by getting yourself a little away from the computer a little bit faster and doing more shooting or allowing yourself to do more social networking or something else. And if you don't yet have Adobe, you can go to northrup.photo because we have video books there that will show you how to use that software, including Photoshop. First, let me say, if you're picking a computer, desktop computers are always going to perform better than similarly priced laptop computers. In fact, a cheap desktop is usually better than an expensive laptop because desktops are optimized for performance and cheapness. Laptops are optimized for power consumption and size. So you are always making a trade-off there. Desktops are also upgradable and have replaceable components. So many desktops will allow you to say, add more memory. You can almost always swap out the hard drive to something bigger or faster. You can replace the monitor and get a monitor that has a bigger screen, a sharper screen, better colors. With the laptop, you're kind of stuck with what you have. And you have to throw the whole thing out and get something new if you want to upgrade. So I urge you to use a desktop unless you absolutely have to travel, or maybe you're just always at the coffee shop. Even then, what I would do is I would probably get a cheap laptop for travel and a good desktop for my day-to-day use, especially if you're at it every day, like a pro would be. I also want to make the point that all-in-one PCs just suck. They just suck. They have all like the downsides of a laptop and that they're kind of optimized to be small. They also generally aren't upgradable. And if your monitor flakes out or you decide that you're sick of the monitor, you just have to throw the whole thing out. So I'll also say they're usually made from the cheapest components. All-in-one computers are designed first. They're meant to look nice. They are form over function. That can be okay if that is your priority. If you want something that looks great on your desk, maybe an all-in-one is right for you. If you want something that runs Lightroom fast and gets you away from the computer as soon as possible, do not get any all-in-one. And here's really, people aren't going to like this slide. But when you're talking about performance, bang for the buck, Windows PCs perform better than Mac PCs. Macs, there's a Mac tax, right? Apple charges you for their premium design, for their premium user experience. And you don't get that back in photo editing when you start talking about performance. Maybe you do with video editing, but with photo editing, it's just not there. PCs consistently outperform similarly priced Macs, but you cannot put a price. If you love Mac OS and Apple, then go for it. I'm not telling you to not do that because your enjoyment of the entire experience is a big part of it. And lots of people use Macs and have good experiences with it. I'm just here to say, if you are trying to optimize every dollar that you spend, you're better off with a PC running Windows than you are with one of the Macs. When you're selecting your monitor, I would strongly encourage you to have 2 separate monitors. This works fantastically, especially in Lightroom. You can put your grid view on one monitor and treat the other monitor as a loop so that you can view it close up. In other words, if you're planning to spend $500 on a monitor, spend $250 on 2 monitors and hook them both up to your computer. They can be lower grade monitors, but having 2 of them there, I find makes the entire experience much, much better. It also means you can be browsing through your Lightroom catalog in one screen, and you can open up the other to be communicating to a client about their photos. So you can kind of multitask a little bit easier there. You can more easily drag photos from one place into a browser window on the other. It just makes everything better. And whenever possible, pick one of the latest 4K monitors. Monitors are available in a wide variety of resolutions, but 4K is about 8 megapixels. Your camera, probably far more than that. And you will see the difference. Higher resolution monitors mean not only does everything look better, but you have to do just less zooming to check things like critical focus. And the image that you see on the screen will reflect better what you will see in final prints because it's just higher resolution. Standard HD monitors are like really low resolution. And in fact, something can kind of look sharp on an HD monitor when it's not sharp in real life. So it can be a little bit misleading. The central processing unit, the processor of the computer, it's the brains of the computer, and it is the single most important aspect of your computer's performance. If your computer is slow, it is probably the CPU. Now, this is specific to photo editing. I'm not talking about gaming or databases or something. I'm assuming you're doing photo editing here. There are a lot of different processors to choose from both Intel and AMD, and now even some third-party companies are making processors. There are different factors to look for. First of all, I would recommend Intel processors over AMD processors for the purpose of photo editing. I wouldn't make that recommendation if you were running database servers or something. Go for AMD. But for photo editing, Intel tends to perform better on benchmarks and in the real world, giving you more bang for the buck. And part of that is the different strategies that each manufacturer has chosen when making their processors. AMD tends to throw you lots of cores. Cores are like little tiny engines, but they'll give you like 10 little tiny engines, whereas Intel will give you like 4 big engines. And so it kind of depends the type of work that you're doing. If you're doing work that could be divided up into 10 little parts, the 10 little engines will get done with that work faster. But the way photo editing works is it can almost always only be put onto 1 or 2 engines. That's the way Lightroom works. That's the way Photoshop works. And that means that fewer, bigger engines churn through that work faster. So when we go online shopping in just a little bit, we'll look at different processors, but I would always recommend you pick, say, a processor with a higher gigahertz over a processor with more cores. Ignore the benchmarks that work all the cores at the same time. That will not reflect the performance of your computer. Again, photo editing only uses 1 or 2 cores, which means all those gaming benchmarks, completely throw them out. They are not useful. Those Threadrippers will do great on that, but they will not do great in Lightroom or Capture One or some other app. This will become more clear when we go shopping in a second. Intel, assuming you're going for an Intel processor, they have different tiers of processors. The higher numbers are better. So i9s are better than i7s, are better than i5s, are better than i3s. I would never recommend an i5 or i3 processor for photo or video editing. Stick with the i7s, and if you really want the best performance, go for the i9. Memory is not that big of a deal with photo editing. I have done a lot of photo editing on computers with 4 gigabytes of memory, and it's been fine. That's you should have more than 4 though. 8 is kind of the bare minimum I would ever recommend, but fortunately almost every computer nowadays has at least 8 gigabytes of RAM. If they give you the option for 16 gigs of RAM, that's great. Take that option. You will see a little bit better performance. If they give you the option for 32 gigs of RAM, don't bother. Like, spend your money somewhere else. You will not benefit from it. I have a computer with 64 gigs of RAM because I do a bunch of I do video editing, like hardcore video editing. That needs all that memory. For photo editing, it never uses more than 16 gigs, so save your money. Another tip for saving your money if you're buying a new computer is to pick a lower spec option. Often, the computer will allow you to choose 8 gigabytes for the standard price, or they'll charge you an extra $200 to upgrade to 16 or 32 gigs. It's almost always cheaper to look up that computer's memory and go to Crucial.com or go to Amazon.com and buy that same memory yourself, and then pop open the case and upgrade the memory yourself. It's very easy to do. Computers have different designs, but if you look up a YouTube video for your computer, you can almost always find a video for somebody who has shown you exactly how to upgrade this memory. That's an easy way to save a couple of $100. And hey, you just paid off the training course that you bought right there, right? Let's talk about the hard drives in the computer. The hard drives store all your photos as well as the operating system and all the apps. Photographers should almost always have multiple different hard drives, unless you have a very few number of photos, which will not be the case if you are a serious portrait photographer. Even if you have few photos now, eventually they're going to stack up. So I recommend a kind of hierarchical storage. You should have a very fast hard drive that you keep the files you're currently working on stored in that fast hard drive, including your Lightroom catalog or whatever catalog for the software editing app that you use. And then you can have a big but slower hard drive that you archive old client photos onto. If your computer can store multiple drives internally, that's a great way to do it. If you have a laptop or you don't feel like opening up your case, you could get an external hard drive or a NAS, a network attached storage. Network attached storage, simply connect to your network, hopefully with a wired Ethernet, but perhaps wirelessly through Wi-Fi. And then any computer attached to that network with the right passwords can access those files. So NASs are really useful in collaborative environments, like when Chelsea and Justin and I all share files. They're all on the network, so we can all access them simultaneously and share them. Even if you're working by yourself, a NAS is a good option because it doesn't require a physical connection directly into your computer. It can stay on even if your computer turns off. And you know what else? You can pull up your smartphone and get to all your photos and stuff if you're traveling, even if you don't have your computer, even if your computer is turned off or unplugged or something, because it has its own life, its own connection to the network and the internet. When you are selecting a drive, it can be difficult to know what's a fast hard drive and a slow hard drive. Generally, SSDs, solid state drives, are much faster than what's called conventional magnetic hard disk drives, often called HDDs. If you see RPM in the description for the hard drive, that's bad. That means it's slow. If it says 5200 RPM, that's awful. That's very slow, basically unusable for photo editing. Some are 4500 RPM, very bad. If it's 7200 RPM, that's still going to be really slow. And nowadays, most low-end computers will come with a magnetic hard drive, and it will say the number of RPM. And that means your photo editing is going to be frustrating. As you're moving from one photo to the next, it's going to take an extra beat, and your entire photo editing process is going to take longer than it would if you upgraded to an SSD hard drive. This is something you can upgrade yourself if you have a desktop most of the time, but SSD hard drives come in a few different flavors, and computers have different types of connectors. You might see that your computer has a free SATA slot, or you might see that it has a free M.2 NVMe slot. You could pick the appropriate hard drive and put it in there if you're techie, but it's not always completely straightforward. Thus, you might be able to upgrade your hard drive yourself, but at the same time, it's not that easy, and you might be better off just picking a computer, buying a new computer that has the right specs here in the first place. You could always find a nerdy friend to get them to stick an SSD in your computer and then move your Lightroom catalog to that. If you are a nerd and you're sizing up SSD drives versus M.2 NVMe drives, I will say there is not a practical difference in photo editing performance. So for all the non-nerds out there, these are terms for different types of fast hard drives. SSD drives tend to be fast, like SSD SATA drives, that's fast. NVMe M.2 drives, very, very fast. And if you're doing video editing or sort of really intensive work, you can see a difference by upgrading to the faster hard drive. But I've done thorough tests with multiple different NVMe M.2 drives, and there is no appreciable performance difference. Therefore, save your money, go for the cheaper SSD, but not for the magnetic hard disk drive. A word about Intel Optane memory. A lot of low-end computers now are advertising that Intel Optane memory will make everything faster. What it will do is it will make Windows start fast, it will make Photoshop start fast, it will make Lightroom start fast, but that's where it ends. It will not make the actual culling, rendering of previews, or editing processes work faster on your computer. So Intel Optane memory, it's a good thing, but it does not replace having a fast hard drive for your files because it doesn't speed up accessing those new files or random files that you don't access all the time. Memory. There is a difference in the performance of different types of memory. And when we go computer shopping online in just a bit, you'll see what I mean. But memory performance is measured in megahertz MHz. More is better. So 3000 megahertz memory will mean an overall better performance for you than 24 or 2600 megahertz. If they give you the option to upgrade to a faster speed memory for an extra 50 or 100 bucks, it could definitely be worth it here. Should you get a GPU? This is a graphical processing unit. It's like the CPU, but for graphics. And initially, a few years back, GPUs were something only gamers cared about. But there are these specialized chips in your computer that are just really good at crunching numbers. And in the last few years, more and more application developers, especially those at Adobe for Lightroom and Photoshop, have started writing code specialized to take advantage of those super powerful GPUs that people have in their computers. And at this point, December 2018, it is worth it to have some type of what's called a discrete GPU in your computer. It will make everything a little bit faster, but it is not worth it for you to go get a top-end gaming GPU. Just get a middle of the road, like a 1060 is fine. And that's a particular model number. And that is going to get you 99% of the benefit of a top-end 2080 Ti card, something like that. Because in my performance testing, you can get more and more expensive cards and you will just never see any additional performance because everything is bottlenecking on specifically the CPU. But having a GPU does help a little bit. A lot of computers nowadays, especially low-end computers, will have what's called an integrated GPU. That means the graphics processing is handled on the motherboard, kind of all in one. These are not good. They will not accelerate your computer's performance. If you want to take advantage of these faster GPU processing that Lightroom and Photoshop are capable of doing, then you need a discrete GPU, something that is basically off the motherboard. And I would specifically recommend choosing an NVIDIA GPU, not because NVIDIA is necessarily the best graphics card manufacturer, but because NVIDIA has the most support for these sorts of performance enhancing add-ons. So just look for like an NVIDIA 1060, something like that, plenty. Networking. People don't realize often that their computer is super slow because of Wi-Fi. Like Wi-Fi networks can often suck. If you have the option of just plugging an Ethernet cable into your computer, that will make everything seem a little bit faster. And as a photographer, you're probably spending a lot of time online. You're probably syncing files out to the cloud. You're probably social networking and stuff. Plug in and you'd be shocked how much faster things can go. You might also talk to your internet service provider, your ISP, and see if they can up your bandwidth a little bit. If you're uploading lots of files, you might even ask them about faster upstream speeds. Upstream speeds mean faster uploads, but the speeds that they spec on their website are almost always the downstream speeds, which are good for downloading and watching videos and stuff, but don't necessarily help you upload massive amounts of files to a client or to a cloud service backup. You can also upgrade to faster Wi-Fi networks to improve your performance if you can't plug in. So you might have like an old 802.11g network, which is actually very slow compared to modern 802.11 AC networks. So check out whatever the latest routers are and make sure that your computer supports that same protocol. Okay, let's go over to Dell.com and actually do some shopping. I'm going to go to the products here, and like I said, laptops not as good as desktops, so let's jump right into the desktops. First of all, Dell is presenting us the option of for home or for work. Usually the for home is going to be the better value. They both are capable of doing home stuff or work stuff. They're just generic computers, but the work stuff is optimized for enterprise environments that have like IT support people. And if you're just a small business or a sole proprietor, the for home stuff is usually going to be a better value. So just do that. Now we can see they offer 3 different tiers of computers here. The Inspiron are their least expensive. The XPS desktops are in the middle. And then their Alienware are like the high-end stuff, mostly for gamers. If we look first at the Inspiron desktop computers here, we'll scroll down a little bit. We can see they have a couple of different options here, but let's take a look at the least expensive desktops. Okay, they're Inspiron desktop here. And scrolling down, we can see they provide a variety of different options. Now, the cheapest one here, $400, 8th generation Core i3 processor. Remember earlier when I told you to try to get an i7 or an i9 for photo editing? i3 is the worst, and that would be really slow for photo editing. So of these 4 computers, these 3 have the i5, and that explains the price difference. The i5 is substantially faster. We can see that these 3 all have the same processor, which means most of the performance is going to be exactly the same. This one has the least memory at 8 gigabytes. This has 12, and this has 24 gigabytes. 24, as I said, kind of excessive. So 12 here is probably the better value, but 8 would also be fine. These 2 are the same price, and this one's only $20 more. So if it's $20, I'd say, yeah, go ahead and get this. Also note that this advertises the Intel Optane memory. This, like I said, is good. It will let your app start faster. It'll let Windows start faster, but it won't actually speed up your photo editing. Now, how about the hard drive here? 1 terabyte, that's not enough for a professional photographer, but it's okay to start with. And notice that it says 7,200 RPM. As I said before, that means it's slow. And do anything you can to get at least 1 SSD in the computer, or plan to upgrade it yourself later, because that 7,200 RPM is going to be, your photo editing experience is going to be kind of frustrating. So that was their most basic desktop lineup, but let's jump up to the XPS lineup here. And as we look at this, we have the option between the tower computers, which are separate units that you connect an external monitor to, and their all-in-one computers. Remember what I said about all-in-ones? All-in-ones suck. So we don't want that. I'm going to go to the tower here. And this will just be more powerful and give us more customizability. Okay, let's pick the tower, and then it's going to give us a few different options, and we'll be able to customize them. So here they're providing us 4 different options. Which is the best bang for a buck? I talked earlier about how the i3 and i5 are less than optimal for photo editing. Fortunately, as we jumped up to the XPS lineup, they start to offer i7s now. So yeah, these are more expensive, but you're going to be getting something for it. It's not going to be wasted. The i7s are going to be quite a bit faster. Now, specs-wise, these two computers look pretty identical based on what they're showing us here, except look at this memory thing here. This one's at 2666 megahertz. This one's at 2400 megahertz. That means this one overall, just based on what they're showing us here, is going to perform a little bit better, and it's $50 cheaper. I actually don't know why this one is more expensive. I'd have to drill into the specs a little bit more. You can see, usually you have the option to kind of customize and customize these different things. So you can say, hey, give me something a little bit less expensive or a little bit more expensive. We'll do that. We'll customize something, but just for fun, let's go to their top end lineup here and customize one of their really expensive computers, the Alienware desktops. Okay. Now they're giving us multiple options for the towers here. The Area 51, based on the price, is their highest end model, but they're also offering the Area 51 Threadripper. Remember what I said earlier about Threadripper? Threadripper is an AMD processor technology. It uses lots of different little cores, lots of little small engines. That's great for some types of work, but it's not great for photo editing. So we're going to avoid the Threadripper and instead pick the less expensive Intel processor. And scrolling down here, we have a wide range of prices going up to $5,200, really expensive stuff. What's the difference here? Well, look at the processors, i7, 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 i9. The i9 is definitely the fastest. Now, how big of a difference are you going to see going from this i7 to this i9 at more than, well, almost twice the price? You're going to see 20% difference. The i9 is faster, but it's not going to be twice as fast. So it's not necessarily a good bang for the buck. This computer also has 32 gigabytes of RAM, which is more than 16 gigs, and that's good, but the speed is the same, and photo editing won't take advantage of all that extra memory anyway. So again, the top-end computer here, we're not going to see any benefit from it. And these video cards, the 2080 series is very high-end and expensive. The Ti is even higher end. That's part of what's contributing to this big price. But as I said, you just need a GPU, not a super fast GPU. So even this basic 1050 here or the 1070, either of these would be just fine. So as I look at these two more basic models are looking pretty good for photo editing. Either of these would be fine. I know they're both expensive still, plus they're both super ugly. But just as an example, let's look at the specs here to see what sort of customizations might be worth it to us. Now, I said earlier that the speed of the processor, the gigahertz, is more important than the cores. So as we compare these two processors, if we pick this model here with the 4.5 gigahertz, if we step up to the next model, it's an extra $500, but the speed is the same. What changes? It adds 10 cores instead of 8 cores. So you're looking at 25% more cores, but photo editing only uses 2 cores most of the time anyway. So you're paying $500, but you will definitely never see any better performance by spending that $500. If we compare these two processors that we start with here, 4 gigahertz and 4.5 gigahertz, it's pretty linear. That means that 4.5, when your computer is totally stressed out, it's going to give you about 10% better performance. So is that worth an extra $400 to you? Maybe, maybe not. It's up to you. Now, Alienware also offers you these high-end i9s, and you can see you pay a whole lot for them. The gigahertz are actually a little bit lower, but because they have some better technologies, they can be a little bit faster. Like they have more cache, for example. But generally for photo editing, you're just not going to see much of a benefit. Like most of the benefit with the i9s is realized because of these high core counts. And again, that's not going to be useful to you. Windows 10 Home is just fine for you. As we're looking at these different graphics card, again, like the basic graphics card is just fine. The Ti models are a little bit better. For $30, maybe I'd get that, but you probably would never realize it. You definitely don't need dual or triple video cards. Now, remember, I suggested you go for NVIDIA specifically for this sort of photo optimization. Some of these are AMD Radeon cards, avoid that. Get one of the NVIDIA cards, not this like this bad, this good. Let's look at the memory. 16 gigs is fine. I would just leave it at the default. If you decide you need 32 or 64 gigs, buy the 16 gig model and then go buy memory from Crucial.com or Amazon.com and upgrade it yourself. It's super easy to do, and you will save usually like 50% of the upgrade cost. They charge you way too much. Now, besides offering different quantities of memory, they're offering different speeds of memory. This is 2666 megahertz, 2933 megahertz, and 3200 megahertz. You will realize a performance difference here. Now, if we wanted to spend an extra $200, if we just had that in our budget, you could get 32 gigs of 2666 megahertz memory, or you could get 16 gigs of 3200 megahertz memory. This is the better value. But also, like I said, maybe just pick the most basic memory and upgrade it. You can also upgrade the speed of the memory yourself, and the motherboard should handle that just fine. Moving on to the hard drives. This one says 2 terabyte, 7200 RPM. Remember what I said about seeing RPM? That's a red flag. RPM's not good. You don't want that for photo editing. SSD, that's what you want. Now, 256 gigs, that is not enough. That's barely enough to run Windows and a couple of apps, but you're going to have a bunch of photos too. I really wouldn't go below 1 terabyte. Unfortunately, 1 terabyte, it's charging you $620 upgrade for 1 terabyte of NVMe. If you go to Amazon and you look for a 1 terabyte SSD, you can pick one up for like 100, 150, 200 bucks, depending on the exact specs of it. If you feel up to upgrading it yourself, you can save yourself a bunch of money, and it's a pretty easy upgrade, especially if you just look up a YouTube video about how to actually transfer your files over and stuff. You can do it yourself, or you can pay a little bit of a convenience fee. Now, they have an option here. They have single drive and then dual drives. I told you that photographers should always have 2 drives because you need a big, slow drive to archive all your files, and then you need like a smaller, faster drive. So rather than spending all your money on a 1 terabyte NVMe SSD, that's $620. What I would choose instead is to get this 512 gigabyte M2 SSD. This part will be fast, and then use the 2 terabyte drive to archive my files, those that I've already sent off to clients. Once I fill up my C drive, I would move them off to the 2 terabyte drive. So I use that for long-term storage. This gives me sort of the best of both worlds at a substantially cheaper price than just the 1 terabyte SSD here. For the power supply, you don't need an upgraded power supply because you're not cramming in 3 GPUs or anything. So just get the cheap one. Nowadays, nobody needs an optical drive really. And these, you're not going to see a big difference in the performance here, but there's only $10 difference. Sometimes you'll see an upgrade from 802.11g to 802.11ac. It would be worth it to go ahead and get the 802.11ac in that case. And that's about it for our little shopping spree. I hope this has helped you save some money on your next computer. So many people will buy a computer that's poorly suited to them, and then their whole editing process is just a pain and can be really, really slow. Other people will go and spend thousands, but they'll spend thousands of dollars on stuff and then never realize the benefit of it. Like they'll get a really expensive GPU, or they'll put in 64 gigs of RAM, and it's like, all that's just sitting there doing nothing. You don't ever appreciate it. It's not a good value for the money. You're better off spending that money on lenses or flashes or training or something, right? So I hope this has helped you get the most bang for your buck and saved you a few $100s at least. Thanks.